You are standing on the deck of the largest moving object ever created by human hands. For city blocks long, 11 stories high, weighing 46,000 tons. The year is 1912, and you are aboard a floating palace that newspapers are calling practically unsinkable. In just 4 days, this magnificent ship will become a tomb for over 1,500 souls, resting 2.5 miles beneath the icy waters of the North Atlantic. But here is what they never told you about that night. The disaster that shocked the world was not just about an iceberg and a sinking ship. It was about a conspiracy of arrogance, a deadly game of corporate greed, and secrets so dark they were buried deeper than the wreck itself. This is the story of RMS Titanic, and everything you think you know about that April night is about to shatter like ice against steel. The morning of April 10th, 1912, Southampton, England. Crowds gather along the waterfront, necks craned skyward, mouths agape. Before them rises a mountain of steel and luxury that defies comprehension. The Titanic towers above the dock like a floating skyscraper, its 4 massive funnels piercing the morning sky like the chimneys of hell itself. Passengers stream up the gangways, many of them unaware they are walking into history. But this story begins long before that fateful morning. It begins in the smoke-filled boardrooms of industrial titans, where human lives are traded like poker chips and safety is sacrificed on the altar of profit. In the shadowy corridors of power in Belfast, Ireland, 2 men shake hands on a deal that will change maritime history forever. Bruce Ismay, chairman of the White Star Line, a man whose very name would become synonymous with cowardice, and Lord James Peary, head of Harland and Wolff Shipbuilders, whose ambition would soon be measured in corpses. They have just agreed to build 3 ships unlike anything the world has ever seen. Their names, Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. Their purpose, to dominate the lucrative North Atlantic passenger trade and crush their German competitors once and for all. But what the public never knew was the financial desperation driving this decision. The White Star Line was hemorrhaging money, bleeding cash to their German rivals who had seized control of the Atlantic with their speed demons, the Lusitania and Mauretania. These ships could cross the Atlantic in under 5 days, capturing headlines, passengers, and most importantly, the massive government mail contracts that kept shipping lines afloat. Ismay faced a terrible choice: innovate or die. The company's stockholders were breathing down his neck like wolves scenting blood. Insurance companies were raising premiums. Creditors were circling like vultures over carrion. The White Star Line needed a miracle, or they would join the graveyard of failed shipping companies littering the bottom of the financial markets. But Ismay and Peary had a different strategy, one that would prove more deadly than any German torpedo. If they could not beat the Germans on speed, they would crush them on luxury and size. They would build floating palaces so magnificent, so opulent, that passengers would choose comfort over speed, luxury over efficiency. The Titanic would be 882 feet long and 175 feet high. To put that in perspective, if you stood the ship on its end, it would tower over the Statue of Liberty herself. It would carry 2,435 passengers and 892 crew members. Inside, it would be a floating reproduction of the finest hotels in London and Paris, complete with Turkish baths, a swimming pool, a squash court, and restaurants that served meals costing more than most working families earned in a year. But size and luxury were not enough. The ship needed to appear safe. And this is where the story takes its first dark turn into deception and deliberate negligence. Thomas Andrews, the brilliant young naval architect who designed the Titanic, was a man tormented by prophetic nightmares. Friends later recalled that Andrews spoke frequently of ships breaking apart in heavy seas, of bulkheads failing under pressure, of the sea claiming vessels that men called unsinkable. His colleagues dismissed these fears as the anxieties of a perfectionist, but Andrews knew something they refused to acknowledge. The ocean was an enemy that never forgave and never forgot. Andrews incorporated every safety feature known to maritime engineering into his design. The ship featured a double-bottom hull and 16 watertight compartments. The bulkheads could be sealed instantly from the bridge with the flip of a switch. Mathematical models showed the ship could survive flooding in any 4 adjacent compartments and still remain afloat. But Andrews also knew the fatal flaw in his design, a secret he confided only to his private journal, discovered decades later in his Belfast home. The bulkheads extended only 10 feet above the waterline. In a severe flooding scenario, water could spill from one compartment to the next, like ice cubes melting in a tray. The ship could survive the unthinkable, but only if the unthinkable followed the rules. The press seized on the safety features with the hunger of wolves devouring fresh meat. "Practically unsinkable," wrote Shipbuilder magazine, though they buried the word "practically" in small print. "The ship that God himself could not sink," proclaimed the Irish News. The phrase spread like wildfire through newspapers around the world, each repetition dropping more qualifiers, until the simple word "unsinkable" became gospel truth. But Andrews himself never used that word. He knew what the press and the public chose to ignore, what the company executives deliberately obscured. Every ship ever built could sink under the right circumstances. The ocean was patient, cunning, and utterly without mercy. Andrews also recommended 64 lifeboats for the ship. The British Board of Trade Regulations, written in 1894 when ships were half the size, required only 16. When company executives balked at the cost and complained that additional boats would clutter the pristine deck space and remind passengers of mortality, Andrews' recommendation was slashed to 20 boats. These boats could carry 1,178 people, but the ship would carry over 2,200 souls on its maiden voyage. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. If the ship went down, over 1,000 people would have nowhere to go but the grave. When Andrews protested this decision in a heated boardroom meeting, Ismay delivered a response that would haunt maritime history. "Mr. Andrews, we are not in the business of building lifeboats. We are in the business of building confidence." The meeting minutes, sealed for decades, reveal Andrews' prophetic reply. "Then God help us all when that confidence meets reality." April 10th arrives with brilliant sunshine and unusual warmth for an English spring morning, as if nature herself is mocking the tragedy to come. Captain Edward Smith, the most respected commander in the White Star Line fleet, walks the decks of what he believes will be his final ship. At 62, Smith is planning to retire after this voyage, concluding a career that has spanned 4 decades and millions of miles without a single serious incident. His colleagues call him the millionaire's captain for his popularity among wealthy passengers who request him specifically for their Atlantic crossings. But Smith carries a secret burden that gnaws at his conscience like acid eating through steel. 3 months earlier, while commanding the Titanic's sister ship, he collided with the HMS Hawk in the Solent. The accident was blamed on the massive suction created by the Olympic's unprecedented size. But Smith knows the truth. He was distracted, overconfident, pushing his ship through crowded waters at dangerous speed. Only luck prevented catastrophe that day. Now, as he prepares for his final voyage, Smith makes a decision that will doom over 1,500 people. He chooses to maintain a fast schedule rather than prioritize safety. The White Star Line needs this maiden voyage to be perfect, punctual, and profitable. Smith, facing retirement and desperate to end his career on a high note, becomes a willing accomplice in the coming disaster. The passenger manifest reads like a who's who of Edwardian society, but it also reveals the stark divisions that will determine who lives and who dies in the coming catastrophe. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in America worth over $87 million, boards with his pregnant wife Madeline, a woman nearly 30 years his junior whose scandalous marriage has made headlines across 2 continents. Benjamin Guggenheim, the mining heir whose fortune was built on the broken backs of immigrant workers, settles into his first-class suite with his mistress, having left his wife and children behind in New York. Margaret "Molly" Brown, the Colorado socialite who clawed her way up from poverty to become one of Denver's wealthiest women, finds her quarters satisfactory despite harboring dark suspicions about the ship's safety. Margaret had studied the Titanic's design specifications and confided to friends that she feared the vessel was top-heavy and vulnerable. Her concerns were dismissed as the fears of a woman who understood nothing about naval architecture. Isidore and Ida Strauss, owners of Macy's department store, planned to spend their crossing relaxing after a European vacation, unaware that their 41-year marriage is about to become the stuff of legend. Isidore, who has survived the Civil War and built a commercial empire from nothing, looks forward to returning to the business battles of New York. Ida, who has never spent a night away from her husband in 4 decades, plans to redecorate their mansion with European antiques purchased during their travels. But the Titanic also carries hundreds of immigrants in third class, families seeking new lives in America with nothing but hope and determination. Irish farmers fleeing poverty and British oppression, their life savings sewn into hidden pockets. Swedish loggers carrying axes and saws, the tools of their trade, dreaming of forests in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Lebanese merchants with samples of silk and spices, planning to establish trading businesses in New York and Boston. Chinese sailors jumping ship to escape the grinding poverty of their homeland, knowing they face discrimination and violence, but believing America offers something better than starvation. These passengers, crowded into the lower decks with everything they own packed into worn suitcases and cloth bundles, represent the great human migration of the early 20th century. They are the dreamers and risk-takers, the desperate and the determined, fleeing old worlds of poverty and oppression to build new lives in a land that promises equality but delivers it based on the color of your skin and the size of your wallet. As the ship pulls away from Southampton at noon, passengers line the rails, waving handkerchiefs at the crowds below. Church bells ring across the harbor in what sounds like a funeral dirge to those sensitive to omens. But in the engine rooms far below, coal trimmers shovel fuel into 29 massive boilers, their faces blackened with soot and sweat, their lungs filling with coal dust that will kill them slowly over decades if they live long enough. These men will work 4-hour shifts around the clock, feeding the fires that drive the ship across 3,000 miles of open ocean, unaware they are shoveling coal into the furnace of their own destruction. The ship's departure nearly ends in disaster before the voyage truly begins. As the Titanic moves through Southampton water, the massive suction created by her hull causes the SS New York, moored nearby, to break free from her moorings. The smaller ship swings toward the Titanic like a guided missile, her stern missing the giant's propellers by mere feet. Only the quick thinking of tugboat crews prevents a collision that would have delayed the voyage and possibly saved over 1,500 lives. Thomas Andrews, watching from the deck, turns pale as death itself. He recognizes the near collision as an omen, a warning from forces beyond human understanding. In his diary that night, he writes, "The sea spoke to us today, and we refused to listen. I fear what voice it will use tomorrow." The first 3 days pass like a dream wrapped in a nightmare's embrace. The ship performs flawlessly, cutting through moderate seas at a steady 22 knots. Passengers explore the ship's wonders with the excitement of children in a candy shop. The grand staircase with its ornate clock depicting honor and glory crowning. Time the swimming pool where wealthy women splash in the latest bathing costumes, the squash court, where men work up appetites for meals that cost more than most passengers' annual salaries, the Turkish baths, where the wealthy sweat out their sins in marble-lined luxury. In first class, men smoke Cuban cigars in leather chairs while discussing business deals that will reshape nations and politics that will lead to world war. Women parade in Worth gowns and jewelry that could purchase small towns, competing for social dominance with the ruthlessness of generals planning military campaigns. The ship's à la carte restaurant, managed by Luigi Gatti, serves meals that are masterpieces of culinary art. Caviar from Russia, oysters from France, beef from Argentina, wine from vineyards that have produced grapes for centuries. But beneath the luxury and routine, warning signs accumulate like storm clouds on the horizon, each more ominous than the last. The wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, work in shifts around the clock in the ship's radio room, a cramped space filled with the latest Marconi equipment. They receive ice warnings throughout the voyage with increasing frequency and urgency. Ships ahead report massive icebergs drifting unusually far south due to a mild winter that has disrupted normal Arctic ice patterns. The warnings pile up on the wireless desk like death certificates waiting to be signed, some delivered to the bridge, others set aside as Phillips focuses on transmitting passenger messages, a lucrative side business that keeps him working late into each night. Phillips, a man driven by greed and ambition, charges wealthy passengers premium rates to send wireless messages to friends and business associates in New York. These messages, filled with gossip and trivial business matters, take priority over ice warnings that could save lives. Each message Phillips sends, instead of relaying ice warnings, brings him closer to a bonus that he will never live to spend. The warnings come from ships whose names will echo through maritime history: the Californian, the Baltic, the America, the Coronia. Each captain feels compelled to warn other vessels of the unprecedented ice conditions they have encountered. Never in recorded history have so many icebergs drifted so far south, so early in the season. The ice field stretches for miles, a floating graveyard of bergs calved from Greenland glaciers, some as large as city blocks, others small enough to escape detection until they tear through a ship's hull like bullets through paper. Captain Smith alters course slightly to the south, but maintains full speed, a decision that transforms a potential near miss into inevitable catastrophe. This is standard practice in 1912, based on the theory that speed and steel can overcome any natural obstacle. Ships regularly race through ice fields, trusting their hulls and experienced lookouts to avoid disaster. Besides, Smith faces enormous pressure to maintain schedule from company executives who measure success in timetables and profits, not human lives. Bruce Ismay himself is aboard the ship, occupying one of the finest suites and making his presence felt throughout the voyage. Passengers report seeing him in heated conversations with Captain Smith, gesturing emphatically and consulting his pocket watch repeatedly. While no written record exists of these conversations, survivor testimony suggests Ismay pressured Smith to maintain speed despite the ice warnings. The White Star Line's reputation depends on punctual arrivals, and the press is watching this maiden voyage with microscopic attention. Behind the scenes, tensions simmer between crew members who sense danger and officers who prioritize company orders over maritime caution. Chief Officer Henry Wilde confides to friends that he feels an ill wind about the voyage. First Officer William Murdoch writes to his wife that he has never seen ice conditions like these and fears for any ship that encounters them in darkness. Second Officer Charles Lightoller, a veteran of Arctic waters, recognizes the unusual calm and dropping temperature as signs of nearby ice, but his warnings to Smith fall on deaf ears. On Sunday, April 14th, the temperature begins to drop rapidly as the ship enters the Grand Banks off Newfoundland, a region where warm Gulf Stream waters meet cold Arctic currents, creating weather conditions as unpredictable as a drunken sailor's path. Passengers notice their breath misting in the sharp air, and many retreat to interior lounges to escape the sudden chill. By evening, the temperature has fallen to near freezing, and the sea has become unusually calm, like glass. One survivor would later recall, like the surface of a mirror reflecting our doom. This millpond calm is actually a deadly omen that experienced sailors recognize with growing dread. Without waves breaking against ice, there is no white foam to make icebergs visible in the darkness. They become nearly invisible mountains of death floating silently in the shipping lanes, waiting like patient assassins for their victims to approach. At 7:30 p.m., the steamship Californian, trapped in pack ice only 20 miles away, transmits a warning directly to the Titanic. Say, "Old man, we are stopped and surrounded by ice." Phillips, busy with passenger traffic and irritated by the interruption, responds with shocking rudeness. "Shut up, shut up. I am busy. I am working Cape Race." This exchange, captured by wireless operators on multiple ships, represents one of the most tragic communication failures in maritime history. At 9:40 p.m., the steamship Mesaba transmits a critical warning that would have saved every life aboard the Titanic if it had reached the bridge. Heavy pack ice and great number large icebergs 5 miles south of steamer track. The message reaches the Titanic's wireless room, but Phillips is consumed with clearing a backlog of passenger messages to Cape Race, Newfoundland. He sets the warning aside, planning to deliver it later. Later never comes. Captain Smith retires to his cabin at 9:20 p.m. after instructing First Officer William Murdoch to wake him if it becomes at all doubtful. But Smith fails to reduce speed, post additional lookouts, or take any of the precautions that maritime tradition demands when approaching known ice fields. The ship continues its headlong rush through the darkness at nearly 23 knots, her massive bulk cutting through the calm sea like a sword through silk. In the crow's nest, 90 feet above the deck, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee begin the most consequential watch in maritime history. They strain their eyes against the star-filled darkness, searching for signs of ice while fighting off the numbing effects of near-freezing wind. They have no binoculars. The glasses were locked away in Southampton, and the key remains in the pocket of an officer who left the ship during a last-minute crew change. Their only protection against the bitter cold is wool clothing and their own body heat, inadequate against the Arctic air flowing south with the ice field. Fleet, a man haunted by premonitions, later tells investigators that he felt a sense of doom throughout his watch. The unusual calm troubles him, as does the crystal-clear sky that makes stars appear close enough to touch, but renders the horizon invisible. Lee, more experienced but equally uneasy, peers into the darkness while fighting off fatigue that threatens to close his eyes at the worst possible moment. At 11:35 p.m., Fleet spots something ahead that changes the world forever. At first, it appears to be a small dark mass, barely visible against the star-filled sky like a shadow cast by nothing. But as seconds pass with the weight of eternity, the mass grows larger and more distinct, revealing itself as the instrument of destruction that will end the age of innocence and shatter humanity's faith in its own technological supremacy. Fleet realizes he is looking at a massive iceberg directly in the ship's path, less than 500 yards away and growing larger with each heartbeat. The berg rises from the water like a frozen mountain, its peak disappearing into the darkness above, while its underwater bulk, invisible but deadly, extends far beneath the surface like the hidden malice of a serial killer. Fleet grabs the crow's nest telephone with hands shaking from cold and terror, ringing the bridge 3 times with the intensity of a man summoning the forces of salvation. First Officer Murdoch answers immediately, his voice betraying no hint of the panic that will consume him in the next 60 seconds. "What did you see?" Murdoch demands, though some primitive part of his brain already knows the answer will doom them all. "Iceberg right ahead." Fleet shouts into the telephone, his voice carrying across the years to become the most famous warning in maritime history. Murdoch rushes to the engine room telegraph, his training taking over as his conscious mind struggles to accept the impossible reality unfolding before him. He signals full astern to the engine room while shouting to Quartermaster Robert Hickens at the wheel, "Hard, a starboard." Then, with movements that seem to occur in slow motion, he pulls the switch to close the watertight doors throughout the ship, sealing the fates of men working in the lower compartments who will drown like rats in a trap. But physics is working against them with the implacable certainty of mathematics and the ruthless efficiency of natural law. The Titanic weighs 46,000 tons and is traveling at 22.5 knots through water that offers no more resistance than air offers to a falling stone. Even with full reverse thrust straining the massive engines and a hard turn to port that threatens to tear the rudder from its mounting, the ship needs nearly half a mile to change course significantly. They have less than 2,000 feet and 37 seconds to cheat death. For 37 agonizing seconds that stretch into infinity, it seems the maneuver might work. The ship's bow slowly swings to port with agonizing deliberation, like a dying man turning his head toward the light. The massive iceberg slides along the starboard side with a sound like gentle rain on a metal roof, chunks of ice crashing onto the lower decks, while passengers above laugh and joke about the close call, gathering pieces of ice as souvenirs of their brush with death. But below the waterline, disaster unfolds with terrifying precision and mechanical certainty. The iceberg's underwater spur acts like a giant can opener wielded by an invisible giant, puncturing the hull in 6 separate locations along a 300-foot gash that runs from the forepeak to boiler room number 6. Water begins flooding into the ship's forward compartments at a rate of 25,000 gallons per minute, each gallon adding weight that drags the ship closer to her grave. The collision lasts only 37 seconds, but in that brief span, the fate of over 2,200 people is sealed with the finality of a judge's gavel. The damage extends beyond the ship's design specifications, beyond human arrogance's ability to compensate, beyond hope itself. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer and the man who knows her every weakness, is roused from his cabin and summoned to inspect the damage like a doctor called to examine a terminal patient. Using blueprints spread across the captain's table and reports from crew members returning from the flooded compartments like messengers from hell, He quickly calculates the ship's fate with the precision of a mathematician and the despair of a condemned man. 5 compartments are flooding, one more than the ship was designed to survive. As the forward compartments fill with thousands of tons of seawater, the ship's bow will sink lower, allowing water to spill over the bulkheads into adjacent compartments in a chain reaction that no human force can stop. The ship's fate is now governed by physics and physics alone, as immutable as gravity and as final as death. Andrews delivers his verdict to Captain Smith with quiet professionalism that masks his inner anguish. The ship will sink within 1 to 2 hours. There is no way to save her. The unsinkable ship is dying, and she will take most of her passengers and crew with her to the bottom of the Atlantic. Smith's world collapses in an instant, like a house of cards in a hurricane. In 40 years at sea, through storms that have sunk other ships and accidents that have claimed other captains, he has never lost a vessel. Now, on his final voyage, facing retirement and a peaceful end to his maritime career, he faces the unthinkable, the loss of the world's most advanced ocean liner and potentially thousands of lives under his command. The next 2 hours and 40 minutes become a study in human nature under extreme duress, heroism and cowardice, panic and calm sacrifice and selfishness. All played out against the backdrop of a sinking ship in the middle of the North Atlantic, while the stars look down like indifferent witnesses to human folly. Smith orders women and children first. The maritime tradition known as the Birkenhead drill, established after a British troopship sank off South Africa in 1852. But with only 20 lifeboats for over 2,200 people, this order becomes a death sentence for most of the men aboard, transforming chivalry into a form of organized suicide. The evacuation reveals the stark class divisions of Edwardian society with brutal clarity, as if the sinking ship has become a social microscope focused on the inequalities of the age. First and second-class passengers, housed on the upper decks with easy access to boat stations, find themselves in lifeboats, while third-class passengers, trapped behind locked gates and steel barriers designed to prevent the spread of disease and maintain social separation, struggle to reach safety as water rises around them like a cold, black tide. The locked gates that separate third class from the rest of the ship become death traps, sealing families in the lower decks as surely as prison bars. Company policy requires these barriers to remain locked during the voyage to prevent the mixing of classes and to satisfy immigration authorities who demand passenger segregation. Now these same policies doom hundreds of immigrants to death by drowning, their American dreams ending in the icy waters of the Atlantic. Steerage passengers, many speaking no English, find themselves trapped in a maze of unfamiliar corridors and stairways while precious minutes tick away. Some crew members risk their lives to guide third-class passengers to boat stations, but others follow company protocol and maintain the barriers even as death approaches. Daniel Buckley, an Irish passenger, later testifies that crew members told third-class passengers to go back where you came from when they tried to reach the boat deck. Lifeboat number 7, designed to hold 65 people, launches with only 28 aboard, carrying potential survival slots to the bottom of the ocean. Number 1, with a capacity of 40, carries just 12 people, including several crew members and only 5 passengers. Fifth Officer Harold Lowe later estimates that half the lifeboats launched only partially filled, wasting space that could have saved hundreds of lives. The reasons for this catastrophic waste of life-saving capacity reveal a perfect storm of incompetence, panic, and social prejudice. Many passengers refuse to believe the ship is actually sinking, trusting in the unsinkable reputation more than the evidence of their own senses. Others fear the small boats more than remaining on the massive liner, choosing the familiar danger over the unknown terror of the open ocean. Some officers, lacking clear orders and proper training in emergency procedures, launch boats prematurely rather than risk panic among the passengers. Others hesitate to fill boats with third-class passengers, maintaining social divisions even as death approaches without regard for class or nationality. But amid the chaos and confusion, extraordinary acts of courage emerge like flowers blooming in a graveyard. Benjamin Guggenheim and his valet retreat to their cabin, emerging dressed in full evening clothes, white tie, tails, and patent leather shoes, prepared to go down like gentlemen. When asked why he changed clothes, Guggenheim replies with aristocratic dignity, "We've dressed our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen. But I would like you to tell my wife that I played the game out straight and to the end." Isidor Strauss, 67 years old and frail from age, refuses a seat in a lifeboat, stating he will not go before younger men. When offered a place due to his advanced age, he responds with quiet determination, "I will not go before the other men." His wife Ida, offered safety without her husband, delivers one of history's most moving statements of marital devotion. "Where you go, I go. We have lived together for 40 years. Where you go, I go. We will not be separated." The couple retreats to deck chairs on the slanting boat deck, holding hands and facing death together with the dignity of two people who have found something more valuable than life itself. Survivors report seeing them sitting calmly as the ship's angle increases, Ida adjusting Isidor's collar one final time in a gesture of such intimacy and love that witnesses weep decades later when recounting the scene. The ship's orchestra, led by Wallace Hartley, continues playing on the boat deck as the ship lists increasingly to starboard, their music providing comfort and maintaining morale as passengers face the reality of impending death. The 8 musicians, ranging in age from 20 to 33, have no obligation to remain at their posts. They could have sought places in lifeboats or fought for survival like any rational human being. Instead, they choose to provide dignity and grace in humanity's darkest hour. Survivors report hearing everything from ragtime to hymns, with the music growing more solemn as the ship's situation becomes more desperate. Some witnesses claim the final song was "Nearer, My God, to Thee," while others insist it was Sanj Ditum, or Autumn Song. The truth matters less than the courage. 8 young men choosing to comfort others while their own deaths approached with mathematical certainty. In the wireless room, Jack Phillips continues transmitting distress calls until the power finally fails, his fingers working the Morse key like a pianist playing humanity's funeral march. His dedication to duty overcomes his earlier greed and negligence, transforming him from a man who chose profit over safety into a hero who chooses service over survival. His last message, sent at 2:17 a.m., simply states, "Come as quickly as possible, old man. The engine room is filling up." Harold Bride, Philip's assistant, survives to tell the story of those final minutes in the wireless room. He describes Phillips hunched over his equipment, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing air, tapping out call after call while water rises in the corridors outside. When a crew member enters to steal Phillips' life jacket, Bride attacks the man with his bare hands, defending his colleague's right to die with dignity. As the final lifeboats launch into the darkness, over 1,500 people remain aboard the doomed liner, trapped by circumstance, choice, or simple mathematical impossibility. The ship's bow is now completely submerged, and the massive bronze propellers, each weighing 38 tons, begin to rise from the water like the fingers of a drowning giant clawing at the sky. The lights, powered by emergency generators tended by engineers who remain at their posts knowing they will die, continue to burn with surprising persistence, illuminating the tragedy unfolding on deck, while providing targets for the lifeboats struggling to row away from the suction that will follow the ship's final plunge. Captain Smith walks the bridge one final time, a man aged decades in the span of hours, releasing his crew from their duties with words that echo through maritime history. "Boys, you have done your duty. You have done your full duty. You can do no more. Abandon your cabin. Now it's every man for himself. You look out for yourselves. I release you." That's the way of it at this kind of time. Smith is never seen alive again, though multiple witnesses report seeing him swimming toward a lifeboat with a child in his arms, only to be pulled under by the suction of the sinking ship. His body is never recovered, leaving him to join the ship he commanded in their eternal rest on the ocean floor. At 2:05 a.m., Collapsible D, the last lifeboat, is lowered away from the ship as the deck angle becomes too steep for further launches. Father Thomas Biles, the ship's Catholic chaplain, leads prayers on the slanting deck as passengers prepare to die, granting absolution to anyone who requests it regardless of their faith. Protestant ministers join the Catholic priest in humanity's final service, proving that death recognizes no denominational boundaries. The ship's angle becomes increasingly severe as the flooded bow drags the rest of the vessel toward the abyss. Passengers and crew slide down the deck as furniture, pianos, and debris crash through the ship's interior with sounds like thunder in a steel cathedral. The stress on the hull becomes unbearable as the ship attempts to defy physics and remain whole while forces beyond human comprehension tear at her frame. At 2:17 a.m., the lights flicker and die as the generators finally surrender to the rising water, plunging the ship into darkness broken only by stars and the distant lights of lifeboats. In the sudden darkness, passengers who have maintained dignity and composure finally surrender to primal terror, their screams echoing across the water like the voices of the damned. Then comes a sound that survivors describe as beyond human experience. A thunderous roar that seems to emerge from the earth itself as the ship's massive boilers break free from their mounts and crash through the forward bulkheads. The sound of 29 boilers, each weighing several tons, smashing through steel plates and plunging toward the bow, creates a mechanical symphony of destruction that can be heard for miles across the calm Atlantic. At 2:20 a.m., RMS Titanic breaks apart between the third and fourth funnels with a sound like the world ending. The bow section, flooded and heavy with thousands of tons of seawater, plunges toward the ocean floor like a stone dropped from heaven. The stern section, still filled with air and buoyant despite the damage, briefly rights itself in a grotesque parody of life before following its companion into the depths. Survivors in the lifeboats watch in horror and fascination as the largest moving object ever created by human hands disappears beneath the waves, taking with it over 1,500 souls and the 19th century's faith in progress and technological supremacy. The ship that was supposed to represent humanity's triumph over nature becomes instead a monument to human hubris and the sea's eternal dominion. In less than 15 minutes, the pride of the White Star Line vanishes completely, leaving only floating debris and the memories of those who witnessed the impossible become inevitable. The water closes over the Titanic's grave with barely a ripple, as if the ocean itself wishes to forget what human arrogance has brought to its depths. But the horror is far from over. In the 28-degree water, passengers and crew members face a new enemy more ruthless than any iceberg: hypothermia. The human body can survive only 15 to 30 minutes in such temperatures before losing consciousness, and death follows within an hour for all but the strongest constitutions. Most victims die not from drowning, but from the cold that steals their life force like a thief in the night. The water around the lifeboats fills with voices crying for help. Over 1,000 people struggling in the darkness, their cries growing weaker as the cold does its work. The sounds haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. Men calling for their wives, children crying for their parents. And gradually, terrifyingly, the growing silence as hypothermia claims its victims one by one. The survivors in the lifeboats face an agonizing choice that will torment them until their dying days. The water around them churns with people fighting for life, but most boat commanders refuse to return, fearing their vessels will be swamped by panicking swimmers who will drag everyone down in their desperation to live. Fear overrules compassion as lifeboat after lifeboat refuses to row back toward the voices pleading for rescue. Some passengers in the boats argue for attempted rescues, but they are overruled.